Our government isn't malfeasant. We know what malfeasant governments are. They're the ones that put political prisoners in jail and take their own citizens and cordon them off in inhumane circumstance. Our government may not be good enough for the American people, but undermining it isn't enough. And telling lies about the American people, it's my experience that our citizens and our residents are disproportionately good. And when you tell the American people that those things are untrue, not only do you undermine our belief in ourselves, which is the most important thing that we have, but you create a playground for those who would advance their interests at the expense of ours.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. Spreading the lie that there is malfeasance in our government, that some mysterious, shadowy deep state is out to get Donald Trump and his supporters poses a grave threat to U.S. national security and, by extension, the American people. We heard that from former Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Sue Gordon. She talked about it on this program last week, not because it's some abstract theory out there, but because it is a message that Trump and some of his most extreme allies have been pushing onto the American people repeatedly and for years now. Especially one person named Kash Patel, who, according to reporting from our colleague Von Hilliard, is currently under consideration to be the director of the CIA or the FBI in Donald Trump's second term. It's an interesting development, as we just learned moments ago, that the current director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, also appointed by Donald Trump, as well as people on the Trump team, are planning for the possibility that Trump will replace his first pick to be FBI director during his first term, Christopher Wray. Wray has not finished serving out his 10-year term, and that is according to 3 people familiar with this matter. But to refresh your memory for a minute on the individual named Kash Patel. He's someone Trump wanted to install as deputy director of the CIA at the end of his first term as president. But Gina Haspel, who was running the CIA at the time, said she would quit if he did that. Kash Patel has since written a book called, quote, Government Gangsters, which, as ABC News reports, calls for a, quote, comprehensive house cleaning at the Justice Department and an eradication of government tyranny within the FBI by firing the top ranks and prosecuting to the fullest extent of the law anyone who in any way abused their authority for political ends. And he has said this in the past.
The one thing we learned in the Trump administration the first go around is we got to put in all America patriots top to bottom. And we got them for law enforcement. We got them for intel collection. We got them for offensive operations. We got them for DOD, CIA, everywhere. And the one thing we will do that they never will do is we will follow the facts and the law and go to courts of law and correct these justices and lawyers who have been prosecuting these cases based on politics and actually issuing them as lawfare. We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice.
Ooh. They're going to go get the people who lied about the results of the election. We hope he means in 2020 and incited people to commit crimes at the U.S. Capitol. We hope he does that. Anyone that lied about the results of the 2020 election and inspired their own people to carry out crimes and chant "Hang Mike Pence," those people should meet the fate that Kash Patel describes there in that interview. Now, as concerning as Kash Patel's appointment was to Gina Haspel 4 years ago, and as concerning as the potential for that happening now is, there are more and different worries around what the intelligence community will look like under Donald Trump. NBC News is reporting on the mounting concerns that Trump will politicize and weaponize the U.S. spy agencies, claims he has made very publicly in the past. Quote, lawmakers, former intelligence officers, and Western officials worry that Trump and a group of loyalists could reshape the makeup and mission of the nation's intelligence apparatus. Officers could be pressured to skew their findings to suit the White House's political agenda. Allies might scale back information sharing due to Trump's cavalier approach to secrecy. And in a worst-case scenario, the spy agencies could be converted into tools of retribution against domestic political opponents, the former officers and others say. Meanwhile, the president-elect has been fielding calls from foreign leaders. The Washington Post is reporting that Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday, their first call since Trump's win, according to what the Washington Post called, quote, several people familiar with the matter. Russia is denying that that call took place, and Trump's team tells NBC News this, quote, we do not comment on private calls between President Trump and other world leaders. So there's that. The New York Times is also reporting that South Korea is worried Trump and Kim Jong-un will soon be exchanging what Trump called love letters once again, a situation that could put the safety of our ally, South Korea, at risk. All of this is where we start the hour with former chief of staff at the CIA and at the Department of Defense. Our dear friend Jeremy Bash is here. Jeremy, where do you want to start? Should we start with Kash Patel and his future atop either the FBI or the CIA? What would you think?
Hey, Nicole. So first, I want to start by saying, as you've said, today's Veterans Day, and today's a day when we honor the service and sacrifice of those who have served our nation in uniform. It's also a good moment to remember the people who have paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. And I say that, and I start there, because I want people to know that the people who wear the uniform of our country, the people who serve in our intelligence agencies, the people who are the career foreign service diplomats serving our departments and agencies, they're not part of any political party. They're not part of a regime. They don't have a loyalty oath to a person or to an agenda. They're not even part of a loyal opposition. They are completely nonpartisan, and that's the way we want it to be. And I think the only thing I would maybe label all of those people, and I put myself proudly in this camp, is we're institutionalists. We truly believe that the institutions of our government, when deployed and used in a nonpartisan, nonpolitical way, serve the best interests of all Americans. And I actually think, Nicole, as you were assessing at the top of this show, how the Senate will consider the nominations of certain national security professionals, I actually believe that there are a lot of Republican senators, and I put John Thune, John Cornyn, Mitch McConnell, incoming Senator Dave McCormick, in that institutional bucket as well. I believe that they will want to see people leading these departments and agencies who will speak truth to power, who will be faithful to the ideal of nonpartisanship. Yes, we need to have civilian control of the military. That's an important principle. We should unpack what that means in the context of a Trump administration. But I want people to know that the good people at CIA, the good people in the Director of National Intelligence, the good people at the Pentagon are not some deep state. They're not going to pursue some political agenda. They just don't have it in their DNA. They don't do it. And they're going to be really working for the interests of all Americans.
Jeremy, 8 years ago, I would have left it unremarked what you just said about Mitch McConnell and Mr. McCormick, and I don't know who else you lumped in there, John Thune. But I think we're too late into the Trump story to hope for people who know better to do better. I mean, the story we led with was about recess appointments because Donald Trump has such a massive political mandate going to Washington. He doesn't need them. So he's using them for a different reason. And I think we both know what the different reason is, right? I mean, are you really pinning the preservation of these institutions you and I both revere on Mitch McConnell and John Thune growing a spine?
Well, Nicole, do we have a choice? I mean, that's the point, which is part of being institutionalist means you believe and subscribe to the view of separation of powers in our constitutional system. And you kind of hit this at the top of the show. We're going to be entering a period in which Donald Trump not only controls the entire executive branch, his party will control the Senate, probably the House, and a significant majority of the U.S. Supreme Court. So anybody who has taken civics understands that when you control all three branches of government with a political party, it's much more challenging to have checks and balances. And so as difficult as it is to contemplate this at this moment, Nicole, I think we have to rely on Republicans, Republican elected officials, Supreme Court justices, and people inside government and outside government who are willing to continue to have checks and balances, to continue to hold the executive branch accountable. If there's an unlawful order given to the United States military, I expect, and I think it will be the case, that uniformed military will not carry out unlawful orders. If these people try to politicize the work of the Central Intelligence Agency, I know the people who work at the Central Intelligence Agency, they will not allow their work to be politicized. They will speak the truth, and the truth will set them free. That's emblazoned on the wall of the original headquarters building at Langley. There's a kind of a mode of operating, a view, a loyalty to the Constitution that honestly, is bigger than any other idea of who's in power, who's your commander-in-chief, who's calling the shots in the executive branch. And I think we can have faith in people who believe in these institutions.
Let me show you what Trump said he would do to the military.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
So comments like that led to the extraordinary event of retired General John Kelly speaking out on record and on tape with his warnings. Again, I know that some of these folks in Trump's circle are smearing the media with calling Trump a fascist. It was actually General Milley who called him a, quote, fascist to the core, something that General Mattis corroborated, and something that General Kelly then said on tape that was widely circulated. The idea that Trump will put the military onto U.S. soil in the functions that he's said out loud, to say nothing of what we don't know he may be planning. What does that actually look like when the military gets their orders from the White House, the commander-in-chief, through their civilian leadership to carry out what may be an illegal order?
Yeah, I think this was contemplated actually during the George Floyd riots, when President Trump wanted to use the military under some theory of using the Insurrection Act to quell First Amendment protected activity. And General Milley looked at the facts, looked at what was happening, and looked the president square in the eye and said, we're not doing that. And I believe that General C.Q. Brown, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the service chiefs from the Army, from the Navy, from the Marine Corps, from the Air Force, from the Space Force, will do the exact same thing. And I should also say that the leadership of the National Guard. And I've spoken in recent days to uniformed military personnel, both enlisted and young officers, all the way up to the general and flag officers, and they have no intent to follow any unlawful order to use the United States military against the American people. I just want to say, Nicole, you referenced retired Marine General John Kelly, and I want to be especially sensitive today, of all days, about his patriotism and what he's given for the country. You know, first of all, today is Veterans Day. It's also the birthday of the Marine Corps, but it's also the anniversary of the death of his son, Robert Kelly, who was killed serving our country in uniform in Afghanistan. And over the weekend, as the Kelly family gathered at Robert's tombstone in Arlington National Cemetery, which is hallowed ground, not a place for photo ops, not a place for campaign events, which is what Donald Trump did during the campaign. You know, I think all Americans should be grateful to families like the Kellys and the countless other families out there who have given and paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom.
I think people are grateful to General Kelly, and I think that the fact that he spoke out should never be viewed through the lens of the campaign that was being waged. I don't think that had anything to do with it. I think that his speaking out was about the institution he reveres most, which isn't the White House, in which he served as the longest White House chief of staff. It is the military. And I just want to tick through, I mean, the members of national security agencies who spoke out against Donald Trump. It's not just Mattis, Kelly, and Milley. It's also Esper, who was the Secretary of Defense. Mike Pence didn't vote for Donald Trump. Cassidy Hutchinson and Sarah Matthews were West Wing staffers for Donald Trump. Eric Hirschman was a lawyer. Mr. Donahue worked at DOJ. John McGowan was the first White House counsel. Rex Tillerson called him an effing moron. Bob Corker was a Republican senator who tried to, for the first time in American history, rein in the nuclear powers of an American sitting president because he described the West Wing as, quote, daycare. Anthony Scaramouche. I mean, the list of people who've warned about Donald Trump's ambitions when it comes to U.S. national security are all former Trump national security officials. So what keeps you up at night?
Well, what keeps me up at night are some of the things that those officials talked about, but also something that I think H.R. McMaster, an Army general himself who served as National Security Advisor to President Trump, also wrote about in his recent book. And I have to just say, General McMaster did not come out there and write some screed against Donald Trump. He was pretty careful, pretty measured if you actually read the book. But one of the things he said is that there is a dynamic when Donald Trump gets on the phone or gets in the room with a dictator, with an autocrat. which is that autocrat knows exactly how to transact business with Donald Trump. They know that flattery works, and that essentially you can get Donald Trump to fold and cave very easily on some highly consequential issues. Erdogan has done this. Xi Jinping has done this. Obviously, we know Vladimir Putin has done this. And, Nicole, you referenced at the top that as Donald Trump fields some of these congratulatory phone calls from world leaders, which, by the way, is appropriate to have those phone calls, we still have to adhere to the principle that we only have one president at a time. We are in a presidential transition. President Joe Biden is the president of the United States. And Donald Trump and his team should not be conducting foreign policy in this transition period. It's highly confusing to our adversaries. I think it sends a signal of undercutting what we're trying to do in the world. And I think the Trump team should just wait. They should field the congratulatory phone calls, say thank you very much. I look forward to working with you. Things are going to be, good between us, and I look forward to talking to you after January 20th, or some pleasantries. But we should not be having the incoming administration conducting foreign policy. That actually keeps me up at night.
And that occurrence was what led to Mike Flynn on a call with Russian Ambassador Kislyak, a call that inexplicably to this day he lied about to the FBI. What would deter Donald Trump, who's going to install a loyalist atop the FBI and the CIA, from doing what, of course he shouldn't do those things, but what this time would deter him from doing that?
Very little, and again, we have to fall back on the strength and weight of our institutions and those checks and balances. And look, we've been talking about personnel, so I just wanted to mention one thing that's been in the news the last 24 hours, which is that Donald Trump said he would not have Nikki Haley or Mike Pompeo in his administration. He put that out, on social media. Again, Nikki Haley, someone, I may not have voted for, I may not have agreed with everything she said, but I think she would have been an important contribution to a national security team, because I think at the end of the day, we can disagree about this, Nicole, but I think at the end of the day, she would be loyal to the institutions. Mike Pompeo, by the way, was a West Point graduate. He served as CIA director. He served as Secretary of State. Again, I might not agree with everything that he did while in office, but this is a guy who literally walks around with security details because the Iranians have still threatened to harm him. And, that's been reported in the media because of some of the operations that he oversaw when he was in office. He is literally at physical risk based on some of the things he did for our country. And he's apparently not loyal enough to Donald Trump. He maybe didn't endorse him, or he might run against J.D. Vance. This is a guy who was MAGA from the start, a key member of the administration, and somehow he's not loyal enough to Donald Trump to put in office. I think he would have been, a good Secretary of Defense. And there are others like that. So the cadre of people that Trump is turning to, I fear, is narrowing, it's winnowing, it's focusing on loyalists, it's focusing on people who are not institutionalists. And I worry about that, Nicole.
Jeremy Bash, your worries are our worries. You have a lot more visibility into the men and women, the incredible public servants. I guess the only last thing I would say about Kash Patel looking for patriots up and down. Yeah. I think the textbook definition of a patriot up and down is on this Veterans Day, the men and women that we're talking about who've served, but also the nameless ones who are only honored by stars without their names on them at the CIA. So I think if Mr. Patel is looking for patriots top to bottom, a lot of them can be found in those buildings in which he served at the CIA and the Department of Defense. Fascinating days, and no one better to talk to about them than you, Jeremy Bash. Thank you for starting us off.
Thanks, Nicole.
When we come back, where Democrats go from here and what they need to do starting right now to rebuild their political coalition. Our panel will be here in just a minute. Also ahead on this Veterans Day, this most solemn of days, there are questions among some who wore the uniform. As Democrats engage in an honorable and sometimes exasperating process of examining and soul searching about all the things that went wrong to lead to last Tuesday's result, it's Senator Chris Murphy who took to social media with a call for his own party, calling them out for ignoring the concerns of everyday Americans, even as it became abundantly clear that doing that was hurting his party. Senator Murphy wrote this, quote, "We are out of touch with the crisis of meaning and purpose fueling MAGA. The left has never fully grappled with the wreckage of 50 years of neoliberalism. profit-seeking cannibalizes the common good, and unchecked new technology separates and isolates us. The things that mattered are disappearing. We spend half as much time with a generation ago. Hard work no longer guarantees economic mobility. Institutions like churches are delegitimized. Place-based identity evaporates as we all become global citizens. The left skips past the way people are feeling and straight to uninspiring solutions. We don't listen enough. We tell people what's good for them. And when progressives like Bernie aggressively go after the elites that hold people down, they are shunned as dangerous populists. Why? Maybe because true economic populism is bad for our high-income base. We cannot be afraid of fights. The right regularly picks fights with elites. Real economic populism should be our tent pole. You need to let people into the tent who aren't 100% on board with us on every social and cultural issue. While it might seem like a story about how far the Democratic Party has to go to fix things or right the ship, our friend David Rothkopf puts it this way, quote, "The American story is not over yet. Indeed, we still have the power to ensure that its best chapters lie ahead of us, and that once again, the advocates for turning back the clock will be defeated by the inevitability of the dawn." Joining us now is David Rothkopf, columnist for the Daily Beast, author of the Need to Know Substack. With me at the table, distinguished political scholar, professor at Princeton University, Eddie Gallad joins us, and lucky for me, former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill is back. David, I loved your piece. Take us through what you've written and what you're finding and what you're sort of preaching, if I may.
I don't know that I'm preaching anything, but I have been talking to my friends and a lot of people in the past week, and there's a lot of hyperventilating going on. There's a lot of people trying to say that what has happened is this big, simple thing or that big, simple thing. And of course, there was a lot of things that happened, including some forces that were not in control of the politicians involved. You know, this global trend against incumbents, or the regular rejection of the incumbents within the United States, the desire for change. Yes, I agree with Chris Murphy. We are out of touch with both the Republican base, but also the Democratic base. Had the same number of Democrats showed up to vote as voted in 2020, Kamala Harris would be the president-elect right now. So we need to take a deep breath. We need to give it some time. But then we need to prepare for the kind of things that you were just talking to Jeremy about, or that you were discussing in the prior hour. But that means don't borrow trouble. Focus on the things that might actually happen. Focus on the things where we can have some leverage, identify partners who have leverage. And even if Trump controls the whole of the government, the federal government, he doesn't control the states. He doesn't control markets. He doesn't control corporations. There are plenty of politicians who have interests that run contrary to his. If Elon wants to cut a third of the federal budget, he's going to very quickly find out that resonates down in districts, and a lot of Republicans are going to say, no, don't do that. So identify the potential partners and set priorities. Defend democracy, defend our freedoms, and defend us from enemies. Because, of course, one of the problems with this administration is it's far too close with enemies like the Russians. But let's be strategic. Let's try to avoid being hysterical.
I want to read something that David French wrote in the New York Times to you. Sarah Esgar, a longtime Republican campaign operative, has a brilliant sports analogy for the process of campaigning. She compares it to curling. For those unfamiliar with the sport of curling, one person throws a stone by sliding it along the ice. Then sweepers come in and frantically try to marginally change the speed and direction of the rock by brushing the ice with brooms that can melt just enough of the ice to make the rock travel farther or perhaps a little bit straighter. What does this have to do with politics? As she writes, quote, the underlying dynamics of an election cycle, the economy, the popularity of a president, national events driving the news cycle are like the 44-pound stone. The candidates and the campaign team are the sweepers. They work frantically and they can influence the stone, but they don't control it. In 2024, what was the stone? It's the same stone it almost always is, peace and prosperity. This is job one. A decisive number of Americans will put up with a politician's quirks, foibles, and even corruption if he or she delivers peace and prosperity. There's zero zero tolerance for scandal when they fail. It feels like this moment requires some humility and self-reflection, not at the expense of moving forward, but in service of it. And I think that we spent a lot of time on the sweepers and maybe not enough time on the stone, but I feel like the stone is where you center your thoughts. So what are your thoughts today?
Sure. We're on the eve of 250 years, and the contradiction that has threatened to overwhelm the country from the beginning is in full view. What I think is fascinating is that all the ways in which we account for what has happened, what happened on Tuesday, none of which seems to account for why these people who are catching hell, the economy, who have issues with the incumbent, why would they then choose someone who trades in such hate? Why would they scapegoat? Why would it become such vitriol is released into the public, into the political system? So Bernie could be right, Senator Sanders could be right, Senator Murphy could be right, but they're not accounting for why then are people choosing to hate? Why such ugliness as an outcome? And that requires an honest reckoning with who we've been, our past, and who we are. And it seems to me now we want to look to the future, not to be critical of David. We want to look to the future. No. We need to look in the mirror and really understand that 73 plus million people voted for this guy. And now American democracy is in jeopardy, fundamentally. And what motivated that vote? He played to grievance, he played to hatred, he played to fear, he played to selfishness, and he played to greed. And we have to see if that's us. It's nobody else.
Claire, I want to read you some analysis from Michael Harriot and the Grio. Kamala Harris didn't lose because of white women. Hispanic voters and college-age Karens collectively hate black people. That is not how white supremacy works. A majority of Americans were, at the very least, willing to overlook Trump's pro-white campaign. The willingness to disregard racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and every other phobia and ism-based bigotry is how white supremacy actually works. Standing in the same spot where Trump will be inaugurated, Dr. King noted, quote, "If America is to be a great nation, his dream must become true. Despite what pollsters, pundits, and MAGA will tell you, Kamala Harris proved once and for all that America is not yet great. And if we truly interrogated ourselves, we can only conclude one thing from the 2024 election of Donald Trump. Black people are the only group in this entire country who are willing to make the dream come true." Whose fault is that? What do you think?
Gosh, I don't know. And is it okay if I say I'm not sure at this point? I'm getting a little bit of a headache with all the Monday morning quarterbacking because I think this needs to sink in. I'm not disagreeing with anything that anyone has said so far in this segment, but I know there's 3 or 4 or 5 things that are swirling around. Yes, there's racism and there's sexism. There's certainly fear and anger. There is the very powerful word of change. And who best represents that to a country filled with people who don't understand when they play by the rules and they've worked as hard as they know how. They can't afford to retire. They can't afford to send their kids to college. Sometimes they can't even afford to take a vacation. They can't afford to take care of their parents. And their grievance is deep and it's palpable and it's real. And Donald Trump did a better job of reaching that through fear and anger than the Democratic Party did, even though those are the values that I think our party has stood on for as long as I've been around, trying to help those people who are just playing by the rules and want to leave the world a little bit better for their kids. But I do know this. I do know that now we have to be mean and tough. And we have to be willing to accept people that don't see every issue exactly the way we do. We all don't have to agree 100% on everything. And I think sometimes the Democratic Party has been hectoring and lecturing about what people should feel about things, whether it's immigration or whether it's climate or whether it's guns. Those are the social and cultural issues that Chris Murphy was referring to. I don't have the answer at this point. I'm still shook, frankly, to my core over what happened last week. But I do know this. I know that until we can agree what the facts are disappearing in front of our very eyes. And that is a problem that I don't know how to solve at this point, and is one that's going to continue to divide us, because if we can't agree with what the facts are, how are we ever going to agree on what the problem is or how to solve it?
I mean, there's a piece that I'll say, just listening to all three of you, people I respect and seek out. There's such an earnestness on the pro-democracy side, and there's such a transaction on the other side, and the transaction won. And I would just, I guess I would say that the customer's always right? So the voters found something in Donald Trump that they didn't find in the pro-democracy coalition. And there's sort of an earnestness about the mission when at the end of the day, people need to feel connected. I think that sometimes Democrats presented democracy as something on the menu that people could choose instead of their price of gas and the price of rent and their anxiety about their children not being able to ever afford a house and move the hell out of their, basement. I mean, I think that the idea that there are choices when the solutions actually are things that the Democrats have the market cornered on. I mean, in Republican politics, you usually have a lesser set of facts, but a better ability to communicate. And the Democrats have a much better set of facts and no idea how to communicate and connect. I want to press all of you on that question. I do have to sneak in a quick break first. I'll be right back. David, you do point to the future and you name check some future leaders. I want to just read this part of your piece. We can imagine that Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, Wes Moore, Josh Shapiro, Andy Beshear, and others. Talk about what they start doing. Do they head to New Hampshire? Do they take a stand on issues? Are they sort of speaking for the millions of people who voted for Harris? What is their role right now?
I think we need an active opposition and getting a special session of the legislature there to prepare for Trump. You have J.B. Pritzker standing up and saying, if you're going to try to pick people up in the streets of Illinois, you're going to have to come through me. You've got Gretchen Whitmer with a different kind of a message about reaching the base, because she understands what that base is like in Michigan. And Wes Moore and Pete Buttigieg and others are going to all have to stand up to do this. And while it is kind of dark for Democrats at the moment, and I agree with everything that Eddie and Claire and you have said so far, I do think we also need to remember that this was very close, that Trump got the same number of votes that he got in 2020, that it was Democrats who didn't show up that were really the difference here, that it was 1.5% difference in the popular vote, and that if there was a 1% swing in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania in the vote, Kamala Harris would be the candidate. So there is a very substantial part of the American electorate, just about half of it, that supports the kind of values and the kind of ideas that are necessary to countervail against the very dark and dangerous ideas of Trump and those close to him.
You were worried about the base the whole time.
The whole time.
Yeah.
The whole time. I knew what Donald Trump's strategy was. It was to activate those low propensity white voters with grievance and hatred. He wasn't paying attention to the undecideds. He wasn't paying attention to the Republicans who were so-called never-Trumpers. He knew they would probably come home at some point. His idea was to turn out all of those folks. He did it in 2016, he did it in 2020, and he did it in 2024. And every time in each of those elections, down ballot, Republicans benefited from him turning those folk out. And how did he turn them out? He turned them out on the basis of great replacement theory, at least gesture towards. He turned them out on the basis of these folk are taking your benefits. He turned them out on the basis that this country doesn't look like the country that you think it should look like. He turned them out on the basis of a notion of whiteness that has suffocated this place. And no matter what we say about Donald Trump, what we say about working class folk, none of it follows that Trump should have been their choice, because he's done nothing to help working class people. Nothing, except for give them the scapegoat. When Ralph Ellison said, when the incoherence of the American project comes into full view, we engage in a tricky magic. And the tricky magic is to make whiteness cohere. And you do it by pointing out the other, by attacking the other. It's been the history of the country. And here we are, 2024. Here we are, 2024, still dealing with it. That's not to deny the impact of neoliberalism. That's not to deny the Democratic brand has been tarnished by the third way. The Democratic Leadership Conference is not to deny all of that. But none of that accounts for the choice to scapegoat people. Trans people, woke people, immigration, we can go down the line. Everything that's on the cultural war battlefield, that's what motivated folk. And I want us to confront it.
And if I could just add, Trump grew his numbers among every group of people. So it is more attractive to Latino men. It is more attractive to Latino women. It became more attractive to black men as well.
Right, because it also includes selfishness and greed. I got a check from him with his big signature on it, right? And white folk don't have a monopoly on selfishness and greed. Donald Trump is an avatar for the evisceration of the public good, where you and I don't have a sense of obligation to each other. We're all out in pursuit of our own aims and ends. So I can see him picking up among those folk too. But at the heart of it, 70% of the electorate are white folk. And white women post-Dobbs voted for him. Why? And then we look at the mixed ballot. The mixed ticket.